Hi, everyone. Welcome to Moving to Continuous Deployment Lessons Learned. So I know what you're all thinking. Oh no, not another CI/CD talk. Here comes all the technical slides that go along with overused buzzwords. It's way too early for this. Oh, shoot. Never fear. I promise that this morning will be more of a storytelling presentation about technical stuff than really walking through slides of code or jargon. So sit back, drink your preferred morning drink, and I'll walk you through our journey, Hover's journey to, why won't it let me do the continuous deployment? And just a note here, there's two types of CD, continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So some people interchange these words, and for us today, let's think of the journey of getting to a feature into production as continuous delivery, while getting specific PRs merged in straight to production as continuous deployment. So continuous delivery. Well, most tend to talk about CI/CD together. Today, I will focus on our journey to continuous delivery and skim over some of the continuous integrations that we did to get to our goals. Because honestly, that's a whole talk in its own, and one of my team members has already done that. So continuous delivery is the optimum goal of always be iterating, always be deploying, and always be flowing. It's the idea that we're always in the loop of planning, coding, testing, deploying, and monitoring. It's an engineering dream to have your projects working so smoothly. So in order to do this, we need to not only have engineering goals, but we also need to be set up to achieve them. With any project, when you start with a preferred solution, it's a breeze to implement. However, the struggle can be so real when you have to implement this in the middle of one project, let alone all the projects at your company. It can be very difficult to start, continue, and build an ambitious project like this. There are many factors that could stall it: risks, knowns, unknowns, political hurdles. On top of that, you have to get your whole engineering department and the company to understand why this is necessary for growth and health of your systems and your engineering team. So today, I will walk you through Hover's challenge of updating our practices and transforming our code and our culture in a way that was necessary for the company and its humans to be set up to success and to grow. So with all of that, who am I to tell you the story? I'm your friendly neighborhood Fro. I'm a senior software engineer and a co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at Hover. Before my current stint in the tech industry, I was a data scientist and engineer, harassing animals in the name of science in various places like here in the Bay Area and Antarctica. Currently, I work for a company called Hover. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the technical stuff, let me give you a bit of background about what Hover is and what we do. We're a Series D startup. We turned 10 during the pandemic. That's something, right? We have two main offices based in SF and New York, but our employees are all over the country and the world. We have 350 plus people, and about 100 plus of those are engineers. So what is it that we do? Well, we're an app where you can take a minimum of 8 photos of a house. And with these 8 photos, we give you back exact measurements of the exterior of the house. And this is with a 3% accuracy, so pretty accurate. We also give you a 3D model of that exact house where you can visualize and experiment with real textures and colors. Our customers are exterior home improvement contractors, insurance adjusters, and homeowners themselves. We have an app we have a web app as well as both Android and iOS apps. So we pretty much have the gambit. And while our customers see a united front across all of our platforms, we have quite a bit of complexity behind the scenes. Some parts of our app are duplicated across web and mobile, while others are embedded as a web view. We have legacy code, we have cutting edge code, and we currently have multiple cloud services storing various assets. We also have the process of converting all of our API requests through GraphQL and various JSONs and databases. So from here on out, I'll mostly be talking about our web platform journey. Mostly because it's the biggest part of our project and because the mobile team while they followed some of our cultural and technical changes that we did, the technology efforts are very different because mobile is a whole different beast. So they had a very different path to follow in some cases. Now, for the reason for this talk. So now that you know who we are and what we do, let's get back to the original topic of continuous delivery. The reason we decided to go down this path was simple: painful deploys. So let's dive into why. When I started at the company 3 years ago, we had what was called a 2-week deploy cycle. So that meant that you had 1 week of pure development and 1 week with a code freeze and a deploy. So during the code freeze and deploy week, QA, design, PMs, engineering would manually do quality checks to ensure that any changes that need to be made before the deploy were finalized and that there were no bugs being released. Then someone who could be trusted would push to prod and work with the mobile team to coordinate releases. While the process, and this whole process would take hours for some reason, with a lot of downtime. Most of us were holding our breath, hoping that things were successful, and praying to all the gods that this thing wouldn't need to be rolled back, because that was a whole effort in itself. Meanwhile, if you weren't involved in the deploy process, you continued to work on work, but you weren't allowed to merge your code due to the code freeze. So this was mostly due to not trusting anyone to push some bug into production, as well as how our repos were set up. And once the deploy was successful, we were then moved to development week. And this is where we would start the week with what we would call merging parties, where we would vigorously merge all the code we could and try and get in that was blocked by the code freeze. And then also trying to get in new feature work so that we could get everything we can in before the next code freeze. So the goal was quantity. And I'm sure that a couple of you maybe have an eye raise. Maybe a few of you are thinking, wow, that seemed to have a high risk probability of something going very wrong. And look, you're right. We knew our deploy process had started to get out of hand. Not only that, it was super painful. What worked when you were a handful of engineers didn't always scale well in the long run. And as a startup, you're always pinned between two things, right? To build or not to build. This big conundrum, AKA to invest in your infrastructure or build new shiny features. And when you didn't have a leader, like in our case, we didn't have a VP of engineering at the time. When we tried to ask for these kinds of improvements, it was always a battle because we had to convince product and leadership it was worth their time. So we could only do so much without having someone that was in our corner explaining why we needed to take time out of feature work to do engineering initiatives. So even though we didn't have a leader, we were able to compromise, however, on these things called chapter sprints. Basically, we got 2 weeks where we could work with our teams across departments. So for example, we had a front-end engineering chapter that would work together to do any kind of refactoring, implementation, and changes that needed to be done. This gave us a chance to pair outside of our direct teams, share information, and really make progress on some standardization. But honestly, even with that, with no leadership or direction to go in, we still tended to just keep going, even though we knew we were a hot mess. Okay, so what was the turning point for us? Well, the big one was we finally hired a VP of engineering. Finally, we had a voice in leadership, someone who came up from the DevOps world and really knew how not only to fight for engineers, but to speak why this was important for the company and its vision. It makes all the difference in the world to have a sacrificial meeting goer that can talk through tech problems and needs in a very diplomatic way. Shortly after Peter started, he founded the Engineering Managers Book Club. This is mostly an avenue for anyone who wanted to learn about being a manager or to learn about how to operate as a leader within the engineering business. What came out of it was having the group read a book called Accelerate. Now, understanding our problem and coming up with solutions are two very different things. So luckily for us, there have been research out there, and Accelerate is one of those books. This book summarized the results of an ongoing study of real software engineering organizations and practices and how effective they are. The authors of this book discovered there were 4 metrics that were key to differentiating high-performing engineering organizations from low-performing engineering organizations. And it gave us not only a starting point, but an idea of what was a good metric and what wasn't. So to give you a look into what those were, the metrics were change lead time. How long does it take to commit and deploy? Deploy frequency. How often is the code being deployed? Mean time to recover. When things fail, how long does it take to fix it? And change failure rate. How frequently do things fail? So for us, the theme that came out of these metrics was the idea of go fast, but don't break things. So change lead time and deploy frequency being the metrics about going fast, and mean time to recover and change failure rate being the metrics for not breaking things. This book was a huge spark for the whole Eng team to get into action. Almost all of the engineering team was encouraged to read this book after the book club read it. And once we did, we were so excited. We wanted to do anything and everything we could to reach the levels of being a high functioning team. Because honestly, who wouldn't? Okay, so now we knew what it meant to be successful, but how do we get there? We had a lot of things to do between now and then, and coming up with the right path was a feat in its own. And before we could even start, we needed to band together as an engineering org and agree on what we wanted to do to approach this. But we also knew that leading by committee doesn't always work. So we needed to have a team who had the task of herding all the cats. And that responsibility fell on a very specialized team. A small but mighty team made up of members from our QA team and our DevOps team was responsible for digging into some of the research, lead efforts on continuous integration, and work with Peter to get the foundation we needed for the team to get started. They're the true heroes of this project. It was no small task to look into our repos, our CI processes, and talk to each team to see how they were doing things. And it turns out that the technical effort for us wouldn't be as hard or long of a road as it was to make cultural changes to achieve these goals. One of the best and worst things about Hover is that we weren't afraid to try new things, pilot new libraries, or experiment. But that meant that we had a lot of things all over the place when it came to our development. While we did want to limit us to any small handful of tools, we also wanted to standardize wherever it was possible. So the biggest theme for us was to consolidate. Part of our biggest problems were that we had multiple platforms, tools, and processes to do basically the same thing. Our biggest task was to consolidate where we could. And the hardest part was choosing the correct platform to do so, and then get everyone to adopt it. The first thing we realized we needed to do in order to do any kind of continuous development was to have a good flagging system in place. Having a good flagging system and using it correctly helps to create a safe path for pushing code to production quickly. It also has the added bonus of being able to turn on features on and off when something goes wrong. It lets us do testing, experimentation, and show progress in production, and it doesn't have to just live on your local machine. So not only was flagging important, it was crucial to the success of this whole idea. And for us, we knew flagging was important, and we just struggled a bit with execution. For example, we had 3 different ways we were doing feature flagging, and in some cases, maybe not at all. We also needed to do it, so we realized we needed to do it consistently across our whole engineering team so that it was simple for stakeholders like PMs, designers, as well as us engineers to use. So after an extensive review, we decided as a company to go with a company called Split.io. It enabled us to have one flag fits them all approach because it worked for the front end, back end, and mobile. And it allowed us to do things that we weren't able to do before, like experimenting with our customer base. The second thing we needed to do desperately was consolidate our environments. We had so many environments where we were deploying things to. Each repo was doing things slightly differently. We had things like master, staging, prod, QA. I mean, the list went on. And we tried several different approaches to solving this problem, some being ephemeral environments and sandbox environments. But in the end, it turned out that when you do flagging, you really only need two environments to do most of your dev work. Staging, to make sure that you have things locally and test in a production-like environment, and production for deploying and testing real data. By reducing the number of environments, this let us minimize confusion and stop wasting time deploying states no one uses. And it had the added bonus of forcing us to really think about what we were merging. We also saved specialized environments for very specific work. So for example, the QA environment was for DevOps to test changes made to the CI system. And the sandbox environments were used for our third-party integrations. So everything had a role. One of our biggest hurdles was overhead to jump from one project to another at Hover. Each repo was set up differently and required you to do a lot of lathe work in order to just run the server locally. So, inspired by GitHub scripts to rule them all technique, we started to standardize how we set up and run each of our repos. This helped us standardize onboarding so that all of our engineers were more comfortable jumping from project to project. And one of our major consolidation efforts and a turning point for our CI/CD system was getting our CI systems on the same page. Like our flagging, we were all over the place with different apps running in different CI systems. After an extensive review, we decided as a company to go with CodeFresh. It's a relatively new CI system, but it had the added bonus of a direct line to the company for help for anything that we needed. So with the help of our specialized team, we were able to migrate all of our apps, our web-based apps, to the CodeFresh platform. We also did quite a bit of work on our security practices. We consolidated our keys, passwords, and login to a very few specific platforms. This helped us to not only better our practices, but also helped us to work towards our SOC compliances that we needed for our customers. So putting everything together, now we had a very high-performing CI/CD system in place for all of our teams to use. So now the hard work needs to take place. We needed to work on our culture. So if we didn't update how we operated as individuals and teams, we would end up in a very similar situation that we were in before this project even began, and we wouldn't be able to scale. It became clear that we needed to regularly work on engineering initiatives alongside our feature work, and we had to find ways to get everyone on the same page. So one of those ideas, again, the theme of this whole project was move fast but safe. And we had to have confidence in our work. So there was a huge shift in getting testing for each of our repos under control. This meant not just doing unit tests here or there, but having a strong list of what types of tests were needed and were needed, but also required for each project to be able to turn on continuous delivery. So this helped us shift our mindsets from not only letting the QA department do all of the testings but being more of a partnership. Things like manual testing, testing plans, and setting up our automation was left to our QA department, while actually writing specific test cases was up to the responsibility of the dev team, like unit tests, feature tests, end-to-end tests, integration tests, smoke tests. They all need to be included in the epic before any feature was released. Also, as a part of our effort, we brought in speakers from the tech industry to inspire and educate our team. Kent Beck is one of those speakers. It was a real turning point for our whole org. His talk inspired us to really band together around some fundamental teamwork habits and really make a culture shift towards working towards continuous delivery ideals. The first idea that he presented to us was small moves. Now, this is the basic idea that when you start with something small, it can build on itself and it can get bigger and bigger. Now, this doesn't mean to start with just small projects. This also meant actually small coding in smaller chunks. I mean, think about it this way. How confident are you when you're asked to review a PR with 154 files in it versus 5 files? You're far more confident with the latter, right? When you have a smaller PR, you learn more, you have better code, you catch mistakes far more often than if you have a huge PR because the code is digestible. Kent Beck also talked to us about refactoring and the mindset behind it, which inspired us all to read the Refactoring book. And we did so in whatever edition was, applicable to our stack. This book was very helpful for us because, again, it preached the importance of small moves, test-driven development, and how to really think about how readable your code is. And it inspired us to start an initiative called Refactor Hour. This was an hour where we spent each week flexing our refactoring muscles in some area of our code. We developed a system where each participant has to do refactoring in a set amount of time, so 1 hour or less. They had to pair with another individual. It had to be a safe change, so there needed to be tests for that change. And it needed to be pushed to prod by the end of the day. Benefits is that it helped us do cross-team pairing, learning new ideas, and cleaning up our code 1 hour at a time. Another thing we developed was the idea of excellent Fridays. Similar to Google's 20% time, it gave engineers and anyone else on the team that wanted to participate every Friday to utilize for self-improvement and learning. So this meant you could read the refactoring book, you could take a class on Ruby, or you could do a mini hackathon where you worked on a project where you always wanted to do for the company. And it turned out by giving the engineers the opportunity to do this, it was not only beneficial for the individual, it was beneficial for the whole company. Engineers were far more motivated to get their work done so they could have that day to work on these things. After presenting their projects, it would inspire new projects and help others on the team learn new skills and help them perform better. Basically, as we increased our skills levels as individuals, we also did that around the team around us. So we really uplifted each other. One example of something that came out of Excellent Fridays was someone came up with a guideline on how to help us move fast but safe in a way that we interact with each other in our code. So this was a guideline of how and a list of what was considered priority for each individual as they worked through tasks and roles for the team. And after it was presented to the whole org, most individuals actually tried to follow this practice. So what was priority? So ensure main was green. We can't merge code if there's a problem with main. So it was the highest priority for every team member to make sure that that happened. Triage errors, to minimize on-call duties and make sure that we don't miss major bugs and make sure that our error reporting is not just noise that we're not listening to. Pull request reviews, prioritize your teammates, help them get their code in and merged, or otherwise you're a blocker for them, and that isn't good either. Fast builds, fast tests. So whenever possible, optimize your pipelines. This enables not only to move fast, but it also helps us to not be blocked by our CI system. That way we can move faster. Refactor as we go. Always be refactoring. That way it's less of a big refactor project at the end of a feature. And our code is always more of a readable state, so new devs can join quickly. And lastly, which is kind of ironic, is new features. Look, if the above doesn't get done, it blocks features over time. So if we prioritize maintenance of our repos while we build, then we can move more quickly on features themselves. So the theme was move fast but safe. And all of these initiatives fed into that, because with small moves, flagging, refactoring, and testing, we were able to utilize the idea of make it work, make it good, and make it fast. To track our project on progress on how we were doing on becoming a high functioning engineering team, we also created an internal tool to help us track these things. It was called the delivery tracker. This tool was not only a way to track all of our metrics, it was also a way for PMs and other stakeholders to know what code had been pushed to any one environment. So for each active repo, we actually track all of those 4 metrics we talked about in the beginning. And we even created an added bonus of having really cool graphs so you could see what it was doing. It was also very handy to track various states of all your PRs. and how they make their way through different stages of the development process. This was helpful for anyone tracking specific changes, and so they could know which environment it was in, so they could test it, turn on flags, or give access to a stakeholder. In the same vein, the QA department also created a QA metrics dashboard where they could keep track of various testing coverage, rate of failure rates, and identify which tests were flaky. So each repo was then able to be configured based on what tests they had and the amount of coverage that they had, so they could track that there. All right, so what did we learn after this huge project? Well, let's start with dessert and talk about what went well. Our small team was able to get most of our setup in our CI/CD system into place within 6 months. And we had all the tools we needed to make continuous delivery possible. We consolidated a lot of our toolings, methods, and for development across the engineering org, while still letting engineers have the freedom to try new things. We basically created a frenzy around reading Accelerate, and it got the whole engineering team on board with this plan. So there was little resistance when it came to getting the work done. We were also able to get the CEO and the rest of leadership on board because we were able to explain to them why it was important for our future and the growth of our company, speed with safety being the main theme of this project. For those who were able to migrate over to the new system, they were really able to speed up their dev work, adopt new cultural changes, and come together for a common goal. So we really came together as a team. The idea of small moves and refactoring permeated everything we did. Not only was it to help us keep our code readable and clean, it helped us to tackle big projects like getting our projects into continuous deployment. Excuse me. For example, some of our teams moved to continuous deployment in a slow, steady increments, like automating deploying once a week, then moved to once a day, moved to twice a day, till finally we were ready for every PR that was merged. We realized that we no longer had to have the perfect solution for anything. As long as the solution worked, we could then make it better through refactoring and small moves. Okay, now let's talk veggies. What didn't go so well? During the whole process, our QA's roles and responsibility changed the most during this project. As I said before, we had to switch to the testing mindset, but some teams had trouble with this. They had trouble relating to the QA team at all. They knew that they needed to do it, but they didn't know how to get past old ideas and ways of thinking. There was this misconception that the QA team wanted to slow them down or be a blocker, when really they could help them be faster. The QA team was the silent hero of this project. Slowly over time, they helped us to see the need for automating testing, working with the QA team, and really thinking about maintainability of our systems. We also disbanded the small specialized team before all the projects were on the new platform. So without the team or a PM left to lead this project, we kind of didn't have anyone to point us in the direction we needed to go. On top of that, we all agreed this is something that we needed to do, but we never really allotted time for each team to do it. It was our annual OKR, but we never really made it into individual quarter OKRs for each team. So they were on their own to figure out how to fit this into their normal workload. Like their workload didn't change because this new project was added. If in anything, it was increased. Meanwhile, the legacy code repos were the first ones to hesitate to do any of this work. They just didn't trust it or wanted to move slow to make sure things wouldn't break. And some teams took over 2 years to adopt, while others are still struggling to do so. Part of that struggle was adopting the new flagging system. It took some teams much longer to adopt than others for a couple of factors: cleaning up depreciating old flags, overhead to getting the new flagging system into our current workflow, learning the new workflow. Legacy code tended to struggle the most. Only recently, within the last few weeks, have we removed old code for other flagging systems and migrated most of our repos to the new one. This is a 2 years worth of work. And even though we were all on the same page in the direction of the project, We kind of got there all at different times and at different methods. This kind of was exacerbated by the fact that we started thinking about monorepo versus microservices. And we decided that maybe it would be easier to deal with legacy code if we split it into our own projects. But then that led to parallels of doing work all at the same time. And in order to do this without having hard branch merges and blocking us from doing future work, we tended to do them all at once and in a group, like huge group pair fashion. But this led to teams coming up with different solutions and inconsistency across the CI setup. In some cases, our eagerness got the best of us. And because we were moving so fast, we didn't really think about what it meant to be successful, just how do we get it done? And in some cases, we were moving so fast, we were working on getting into the new CI platforms before our specialized team was even ready for us to start. So like this picture, we were trying desperately to change a tire on a moving vehicle. So let's have some fruit, combine the sweetness with the tanginess. What could we have done to maybe minimize this pain? Currently, since the team was disbanded, we only have a few individuals who are in charge of keeping our connections to our new vendors alive. And if one of those individuals leaves Hover for any reason, the connection would be lost. So what we could really benefit was consistent, dedicated resources for maintaining our pipelines and connections with all of our new vendors. We realized that because we're so gung-ho about getting the idea we were so gung-ho about this project, we kind of jumped the gun into getting our works into the CI/CD platform before the setup was ready. We probably could have benefited from a more laid out plan with key goals and key times in which to hit those specific things in order. It would have also been super beneficial for us to have a demo project with documentation. It would have been a good starting point for each team as they move their project to the new system. And it would have minimized the differences in setup that were purely due to the lack of coordination and not to the differences in this type of projects they were. And you might have noticed that during the consolidation phase, we went with a whole lot of new tooling instead of utilizing ones we already had. Like I said before, it's one of our strengths and weaknesses. We love trying new things, but we could have done it with something that was already existing. Would it have been a bit easier on us? Probably, because honestly, the hardest part about the technical side was learning all the new tools. So my advice for you, if you decide to do this with your company, is really do your homework on what you have and what you could use, and really weigh the pros and cons for learning a new system. Okay, so I said a lot, done a lot. Did we do it? Are we there? Are we done? Kind of. Our mobile team is still far behind due to the nature of launching mobile apps. And during this huge CI/CD project, they were revamping their mobile application. So currently they have a dedicated team and are working to get the mobile team closer to continuous delivery. We also realized that even though the project was finished for the website, it's not really finished. It's actually work that's based for every project to grow and continue and build as our infrastructure does. Just like the original idea of CI/CD, this is a living, breathing project, and it'll grow and shift as our company and our team does. So as long as we keep up the work, never let it go stale, and have our code base working as we want it to, this project will be a thing of beauty. So to summarize, things we needed to work on were weighing the pros and cons of starting a new tool instead of using ones that we already had. We need to slow down and maybe have a better plan for all of our individual teams, like making epics for each of them to ensure that the work got properly scoped and put into the system so that it wasn't just something we had to get done outside of things. Create examples and documentation for better adoption, and ensure that we had continued resources and leadership to maintain our new systems for the lifetime, not just for the immediate project. The things that went well were we consolidating toolings and we could do less of a lift for all of our engineers. We were able to convert the whole org onto the new CI/CD system. New metrics that now track how successful we are for the organization. We came together as a team, even though it was hard, to work towards a huge project and the whole company. We changed our culture for the better, and we really created some good engineering practices for our org. And working closely with our vendors helped us enable and get updates with the new tooling. So it worked really best for us. So I've said a lot, I've talked a lot. With that, I will take any questions that you have in the chat, and feel free to check out our current job postings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fro. That was awesome. I'll let everyone take some time adding their questions into the chat here or into Whova. There are a few questions in Whova, so I can read those off as well if you want to respond to those.
And feel free to ask questions. Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy.
We got plenty of time.
One of the questions that was in Whova, which was written by Juliet, she said, what are the basic tools and processes required to enable continuous deployment? I feel like that was a lot of what you talked about, but if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, it was, I mean, we had a lot of tools for the continuous integration and continuous delivery part, but I think the biggest thing to just reiterate was like getting your team together to work on around like initiatives to be able to do these things as a whole company. If you don't have buy-in from everyone, it's a struggle to get them across. So, and working slow, small steps, like that was a huge thing. Refactoring as you go and small steps. I mean, those were vital to everything.
Great. And we have a question that came through. Do you mind sharing the tool you used for QA dashboard to show what the progress is?
It's an internal tool, but one of our QA developers actually designed it internally. So I could talk to them to see if we can make it like a, like a public tool or a public library. But it is something that was just it's a JavaScript app, I'm pretty sure, that we just have internally. So it's behind our VPN and everything. So, but it's something that I can look into to see if it can be like an open resource project.
That would be great. Courtney asked tips for getting that buy-in.
Yeah, have a sacrificial meeting goer. I mean, that was like a huge thing for us, is having someone in leadership that could talk to everyone. But I think the other thing is I think the biggest tip was knowing how to play to your audience, right? So for us, talking to non-engineers, we said, look, moving fast but safe will help us get your features in quicker. Talking to engineers, it was like, look, we have so many things right now going on, like let's consolidate, and that way you can think about one less thing. You can work on one less thing. You can just get your work done as you go. So it was really about like making sure that you understood what was important to each person and helping them see the light as to why this project was important. And honestly, reading the book Accelerate, it's a really good read, and it'll convince anyone. So I highly recommend reading that book if you have a chance.
All right, we have a few other questions that came through. Thank you for sharing your experience, what you ended up using, of what architecture model, microservices, or domain-driven design.
So we did end up doing kind of a hybrid. We're still not convinced on this, right? So we do have microservices. We also have monorepos. So we're kind of like a mixed bag. We, as an org, haven't quite figured out what we wanted for that. So we still have quite a bit of complexity with what we have. It's kind of all over the place. And we're figuring that out as we go along. Like I said, small moves are refactoring as we go.
Great. Supriya asked, did you start certain areas of the application first, middle tier, web app, business apps, and if so, reasoning behind the preference?
Unfortunately, we did not. We all kind of had first year together. We all just got so excited that we all kind of jumped in and did it all at the same time, which was kind of our downfall in a way, because we also tried to do this ahead of the specialized team getting everything in place. So we were all kind of learning and doing things at a, together, but like apart, which led to a lot of inconsistency across our stack. I think it would have been really good for us to think about that a little bit more and really plan out why it would be better to start with one or another. The ones that took the longest for legacy code, because no one wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole, to be completely honest. So only recently have we gotten some of them, and one of our oldest code bases still hasn't quite gotten there yet. So we'll get there over time.
Hannah just put in the chat, what parameters did the team consider while deciding on the tools they used?
Yeah, so the specialized team did a lot of the research and basically told us, hey, these are the tools we decided to go with because of X, Y, and Z benefit. Some of the tools that we decided to go with probably didn't need to go with them because we already had something that would have worked just as well. But we had the things that would tip the scale were like having direct access to the vendors themselves, so we could get those one-on-one, like be able to change features as they were building their code base. Or like in the case for Split IO, it was having one flagging system that went across all of our platforms. And that was huge because we were such a hot mess with flagging. We had like internal tools and all these other things. And it was just nice to be able to have one platform that PMs and engineers could figure out. And so that like engineers could just put the flag in place and leave it up to the PMs or whoever was in charge of that feature to turn it on or off, or what went into the parameters of that. So there, it just depended on what the tool was and what we needed it for.
Great. We have a few more minutes before we wrap the session. So Lena added another question in the chat. If anyone else has any, definitely add them in. Lena asked, what are the benefits of you switching to CodeFresh than using Jenkins according to your experience?
Yeah. A lot of people at the company didn't really like Jenkins for whatever reason. It was kind of one of those ones where we used it, but no one liked it. Thought it was outdated. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone who works there, but that just was the opinion of our team. Most of our things were already on Circle CI, so we just had a few legacy codes that weren't. And we decided to go with CodeFresh because it was a relatively new platform. We could use Docker containers and kind of use Argo and really kind of get a really cool CI system. We had this unique thing where we were able to talk directly to the vendors. Like we have a Slack channel with them. So whenever problems come up, we are like able to talk to a rep and things like that. So there was a little bit of benefit of it being a new system and us being able to kind of talk to them. And outside of that, using some new tooling that they wanted to be able to use that I don't know that Jenkins was set up for at the time or still is. So yeah, it's kind of more a feeling thing, less of like tactical. Like I'm sure there were tactical reasons, but I think it was another new shiny that we wanted to get. It's kind of our downfall, to be completely honest. We love new shiny things.
Who doesn't?
I know.
And there's one last question. There's a ton of other questions in Whova, so Fro will definitely respond to those after this session. But one I thought was really interesting was that someone asked, is the Refactoring book a good read for students? Yes,
100%. It is. There's multiple versions out there for different types of frameworks. So pick the one that works for you for languages. It's a dense book, so I'm not going to tell you it's an easy read, but it is life-changing. If you can figure out how to refactor your code, it'll change your mentality of having that perfect code base. And it really gets you to think about testing, small moves, and readability, which is huge. We're humans, right? Like, yeah, we code, but we want to be able to read what the hell we're coding, even last week, right? Or a month from now. So really having that skill actually makes you not only good at coding, but it makes you good at anything else in your life. So it's life-changing. I'm going to preach to that. So not just students, but anyone. I think anyone who's an engineer in any shape or form should read that book.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fro. This does conclude this session. We appreciate you all coming by. Definitely continue to add your questions into the Whova app, and everyone else head over there to look at the questions and responses. You can log out of this Zoom session and get ready for the next one kicking off in a little bit. So in the meantime, stretch, grab another cup of coffee or tea, and we'll see you back in the main room in the other sessions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bro.
Thank you.
Okay, I can stop sharing now, I guess.
Yay!
Yay. Oh, my poor puppy was dying. At like halfway through, she was like ripping through the door. I could hear her. Like,
Oh no! I heard her every now and then, but you wouldn't even realize it was your dog because you just kept going so smoothly. It didn't affect anything.
woo, okay, good.
Bro, you were awesome. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Really, really great.
Loved all of your memes and GIFs.
Even the way you started off, you're like, this isn't going to be what you think it is. So calm down.
It's one of my biggest pet peeves when someone comes in and they're like, this is a great story. And then all they show is code and you can't really even understand what the heck they did. So I'm like, I'm going to tell a story and it's going to be, that's all I'm going to do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for kicking us off. Really great job. I'm going to go ahead and close the room now so we can get ready for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
We'll see you on the
Bye.
main stage.